lie, la 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 lie, la 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 lie, la lie, la 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 lie, la 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 lie, lie, a night and a nine and a na 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 na, I nine nine na na nine 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 na na nine nine na 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 nine 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 nine, and na na nine na na nine na na nine, and a nine nine na 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 nine 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 nine. Shalom, shalom, friends. It's great to see you. Wonderful to have you all here. In addition to our regulars, it is also great to see our new VBM team member here, Shulamit. So welcome, and welcome to the VBM, and welcome to our learning series. We are in session 8 of the 10 greatest Jewish ideas. And today's title will be called Mitzvot, as we will unpack what we mean by that. But let's start with a poll question. What is Judaism most at its essence? Option 1, a religion, a faith. Option 2, a people, a community. Option 3, a system of laws and ethics. So of course, we always want to say, oh, it's all of it. Right? How can I choose? But if you were to say in one phrase, like, what is Judaism most at its essence? Are we a faith, a religion? Are we a people, a community? Or are we a system of laws and ethics? That's what I expected. 11% say it's a religion or faith. 67% say a people or a community. 22% say a system of laws and ethics. All right. Very good. So let's come back to the issue of peoplehood. But on the face of it, the concept of mitzvot might not seem like the most obvious contender for great Jewish ideas. I mean, what's so great about that? In the vernacular of liberal Jews, a mitzvah, the singular of mitzvot, commonly refers to a good deed. What you do, would you do a mitzvah and help me to move next week, you might say. Right? However, for traditional Jews, to refer to a mitzvah is to refer to generally a commandment given by God, which is how I'm typically referring to the word here, kind of a traditional category of specific actions to take in the world. And in addition to the idea of good deed, the mitzvot as commandments. So why is this such a great and distinctly Jewish idea? I'm going to lay out 3 main reasons why the mitzvot deserve to be in this series. Number 1, action. Number 2, obligation. And number 3, relationship. These are the 3 reasons I'm going to explore as to why I think this category is such a great Jewish idea for the world. Action, obligation, and relationship. Let's start with action. Many religions function primarily in the realm of belief, i.e., articles of faith, testimonies of being saved. However, in Judaism, we have a religion that does not dismiss the importance of belief. After all, observant Jews will pray the Shema prayer several times a day, confirming a belief in God's oneness, but which also does not particularly emphasize belief. Rather, Judaism is unique in that it prioritizes action, right? So if I'm a Christian and I say, I don't believe in Jesus anymore, well, you're really not a Christian. I mean, you can still have a Christmas tree. Nobody's going to stop you. But you're really not a Christian anymore. That belief is so fundamental to what it means to be a Christian. If you're a Jew and you say, I don't believe in X, Y, and Z, well, guess what? You're still a Jew, right? You don't have to believe in anything to be a Jew, right? That identity goes further than the realm of belief. That's not to say there aren't traditional beliefs, of course, but those beliefs are not necessary to be a Jew. Our commandments are defined by action. The rabbis of the Talmud assert there are 613 biblical mitzvot, 248 positive commandments, things to do, and 365 negative commandments, that which are forbidden to do. In Hebrew, these commandments are called mitzvot aseh and mitzvot lo ta'aseh, those to do and those not to do. One teaching tells us that the 365 of the mitzvot lo ta'aseh refers to the number of days in the solar year, while the 248 of the mitzvot aseh refers, perhaps less intuitively, to the number of limbs on a person. So we can ask Dr. Gary Friedlander here, do all humans have 248 limbs? Anyways, it doesn't matter if it's a biological truth, it's an idea. These mitzvot are scattered throughout the Torah. However, a bit perplexingly, our sages do not explicitly list what the 613 mitzvot are. That work fell upon later Jewish scholars of the medieval period, such as Maimonides. For example, in 13th century Spain, an anonymous scholar wrote a staggering multi-volume work called the Sefer HaChinuch, detailing each of the 613 commandments. For each mitzvah, the author considers its Torah sources, its philosophical underpinnings, and general observation and applicability. In the introduction of the work, the unnamed author, he refers to himself only as a Jew from the house of Levi in Barcelona, says that he is undertaking this book in order to awaken the hearts of his young son and that son's peers. Sefer HaChinuch is indebted to the work of the Rambam, Maimonides, who almost 200 years prior had listed all 613 mitzvot in his great work, the Mishnah Torah. Scrolling through the list of commandments today, it's striking how the majority of the mitzvot are actions, things to do. A selection of the verbs paints an effective picture: to know, to love, to fear, to pray, to cling, swear, to emulate, to recite, to tie, to make, to affix, to collect, to write, to bless, to build, to keep watch, to serve, to prepare, burn, to remove, to clothe, to carry, to anoint, to marry, offer, to bring, to give, to celebrate, to rejoice, to eat, to fast, to leave, to separate, to thank, to sound, to read, to remit, to cover, to dwell, and to rest. The mitzvot reveal to us that holiness is not merely a state of belief, but one of action. In fact, the very first line that we learn about God from the very beginning of the Torah is that God acts. Bereshit bara Elohim et shamayim v'et haaretz. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God creates, God sweeps, God speaks. Furthermore, the first words that God says to the newly formed humans is not what they should believe, but what actions they should take. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and master it. So the first thing we learn about the Torah's idea of God is that God acts. The first thing we learn about God's relationship to humans is God tells them to act. Certainly, I do not wish to diminish the importance of theological positions now and throughout history. Theology is interesting and important. I would never assert that belief is irrelevant to Judaism. However, I do assert that theological positions and belief are not what the Torah is about centrally. Rather, the Torah is primarily about action, as typified in the mitzvot. And I think this is such an amazing idea, that Judaism is telling us that we shape ourselves. We shape our families, our communities, and our world, not through our beliefs or our emotions, not even through praying that God do it for us, but by taking actions ourselves. We are empowered by the Torah to act in the world. It is up to us to act and build the world we wish to live in. We don't pray for God just to fix the world. We roll up our sleeves and work to improve the world every day. I'm reminded of a quote I have often seen attributed to Teddy Roosevelt. In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you could do is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you could do is nothing. I love that. The second best thing is to do the wrong thing. And the third best thing is to do nothing. I'm going to think about that next time I don't know what to do. This idea bears reiterating that the worst decision is not to take a less than ideal action, but to take no action at all. Alternatively, in the always amusing words of ball player and humorist Yogi Berra, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. The real danger is in indecision. As early psychologist William James, brother to the novelist Henry James, wrote, "There is no more miserable human being than the one in whom nothing is habitual but indecision." Often we might mistake indecision as putting off a decision. However, the fact is that, as these quotes suggest, not making a decision is the decision, and it is always the wrong decision. Truly, the worst choice is to be passive. We have to be proactive agents, taking responsibility and taking action in the world. No wonder then that so many of our 613 mitzvot are action-based, just about all of them. It's difficult to imagine that we could even have such a robust set of mitzvot if they commanded us not on action, but on matters of belief or emotions. How can you command anyone what to think, as if you can control what you think? And yet we are, in fact, commanded at all times, as the Torah says, in realms of belief to a small degree, to not believe in foreign gods, for example, to think of a commitment to oneness or a love and fear of the divine. As it says in Sefer HaChinuch, the obligation of these is constant. What should we make of being commanded to believe or feel certain things? There's no one answer to this question. It's more philosophical in nature. Can we change what we feel or believe based on a command? Perhaps not. Can you just come to love someone because you've been told to love them? Perhaps in following other commandments that are more action-based, we are creating space in ourselves for belief and feeling. To understand this possibility better, we might bring in Chassidut. The great 19th century Hasidic leader, Rabbi Yehuda Leib, Alter of Ger, often referred to by the title of his defining work, the Sfat Emet, or the Sfas Emes, expounded upon the nature of the mitzvot is in his eponymous work. In meditating on the mitzvot, the Sfat Emet brings together two verses from Proverbs. The soul of man is the candle of God, and for a mitzvah is a candle. If the soul is a candle and a mitzvah is a candle, then in some sense our souls are mitzvot, and the mitzvot are connected to our souls. In a beautiful and almost transcendent commentary on Parshat Tetzaveh, which includes God's Exodus commands to bring olive oil for the lamp, the Sfat Emet reimagines the familiar formula of brachot. Usually, Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, as we all know, is translated as, who sanctified us with God's commandments and commanded us. However, the Sfat Emet offers that v'tzivanu be read not just as commanded us, but also as has made us a mitzvah. Wow. The Sfat Emet just totally reinterpreted a bracha for us. Not saying that we're commanded, but that God has made us a mitzvah in our essence, in our souls. We are a mitzvah. That's who we are. Meaning God has transformed us as humans into mitzvot. What a beautiful concept this is, that we ourselves can become the mitzvot by performing mitzvot. When we do kindness, it's not just that we did kindness, our essence is kindness. From this mystical offering, I take that even if we do not know how to command ourselves in terms of belief or emotion, taking on mitzvot might help lead us to such a place. Okay, that's category one, friends. Why the notion that religion is about action is so important for the world, and why I think it's an anomaly in religions of the world. The second important element of mitzvot is that they give us obligations. The word mitzvah can be understood in the context of a related Aramaic word, tzavta. This changed my whole relationship to mitzvot when I learned this, which refers to connectedness or attachment. The correlation between these words was pointed out initially, as far as I know, once again, the Sfat Emet. And mitzvah comes from the word savta, which means connection, right? Mitzvah we should not translate as commandment, but as a connection. When I do a mitzvah, I'm connecting. What does connection have to do with obligation? Well, it is our connectedness to the world that gives us obligations within it. If somebody has a child and they are connected to them, there's a mitzvah to care for the child. If you choose to marry someone, you take care of them. If you have a parent, you take care of them. It's a mitzvah, meaning it's not just a law. It's not just a law to take care of your parent or child. It's a connection. The mitzvah is a vehicle for connecting more deeply. We live in a modern era where many people think our choices should largely be about what makes us happy, what feels good, or what's popular of the day. The notion that we are obligated agents, which, by the way, does not require any particular degree of belief in God. or as a commander, nor any particular understanding of where the commandments even come from, is a very profound philosophical stance. We are simply obligated through the notion of mitzvot. Claims are made on us beyond ourselves in terms of our moral choices and in terms of our societal obligations. Accepting that we are obligated is not obvious. It's not obvious at all, really. The default in our society is for people to say things like, I'm just going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to do what feels right to me. Or perhaps I'm just going to do whatever the laws of my society say is allowed. I'm just going to follow the laws of the land. If it's illegal, it's good. Anything that's legal is good. However, Judaism offers us a larger calling towards its system of moral obligations. This is so much richer. In terms of correlating the nature of our obligations to normative ethics, there are three camps to consider: deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics. We can see how the approach of the mitzvot aligns. The mitzvot may most easily align with the school of deontology. The word deontology was coined in the 19th century by philosopher Jeremy Bentham by combining two Greek words, deon, that which is binding or duty, and ology, right, the study of. So deontology is the study of duty. And indeed, deontology asserts that the moral good emerges from duty. The central figure of deontological moral theories is the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant. For Kant, the moral quality of an act is the intention behind it, principles informing it. He was adamantly against using others as mere means to one's end. And he asserted that the principles we act on ought to be principles that could be accepted as universal law, meaning they would be acceptable to all rational agents. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, the 19th century thinker who brought together secular studies and traditional Jewish learning, famously embraced Kantian aesthetics in his monumental work Halakhic Man, written in 1983, published in 1983. In this work, Rav Soloveitchik synthesizes continental philosophy and Jewish law, demonstrating that being ethical and observant are not at odds with each other. Because from the Kantian perspective, the moral is defined by the fulfillment of our duties, and halakha, Jewish law, is all about duties. The deontological approach stands in stark contrast to consequentialism, which, as the name suggests, purports that rather than obligations and principles, only outcomes determine whether an act is ethical. The classic example of consequentialism is utilitarianism, which always seeks to maximize the good and minimize the bad. The issue with this system is that definitions of good and bad vary widely. Consider, for example, that in our hedonistic society, the good is often defined as that which results in the most pleasure. Whatever makes me feel the most good or makes someone else feel the most good, that's the good, right? We can see how there's a moral deficit in this schema. The third philosophical camp after deontology and consequentialism is virtue ethics, guided by the principle that we should do what makes us more virtuous, what makes us better people is the choice I should make. I should choose the act that will make me a more compassionate person. This school is most concerned with the moral character of the person making decisions. There is some resonance between virtue ethics and the nature of our obligations from the mitzvot, in that both promise that leading an ethical life is transformative, that we ourselves are changed as a result of our actions and choices. So friends, if we are thinking about our mitzvah obligations as part of normative ethics, does that mean that we are only obligated by what was articulated at Sinai? No, absolutely not. With Shavuot coming up next week, it's worth thinking about that. Many great Jewish thinkers have articulated the continued evolution of our moral obligations. For Emmanuel Levinas, a face-to-face encounter, when I see someone's face, my eyes look at their eyes. Our facial expressions are reacting to each other. With another person in this encounter, it gives rise to spontaneous precognitive responsibilities towards the other person. This concept is often referred to as the face of the other. Levinas correlates the face of the other to the voice at Sinai, the divine voice of revelation, that which obligated us to care for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. The conclusion is that our obligations are not just historical, but still emerge today. For more recent scholarship, we might consider feminist biblical scholar Tamar Ross, a professor of Jewish theology at Bar Ilan University in Israel. Dr. Ross's work focuses on correcting the invisibility of women in Jewish thought. In her brilliant work, Expanding the Palace of Torah, Feminism and Orthodoxy, she argues for a theology of cumulative revelation, meaning that revelation did not occur once with the reception of Torah at Sinai. Rather, revelation is ongoing, unfolding in history as new obligations emerge. Here in modernity, for example, we have feminism and democracy. These concepts did not exist in the time of the Torah, yet they are imperative for an understanding of our moral obligations to one another today. From this, we see that revelation is expansive as new duties emerge out of new realities. Such an idea has its roots in foundational Jewish texts. We might recall the Mishnaic opening of Pirkei Avot. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and handed it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, the men of the Great Assembly. Along with this reception history, the rabbis of the Talmud believed that one could hear a bat kol, a distant echo, emanating all the way from Sinai. Pirkei Avot tells us that this voice went out anew every day, reminding us to learn Torah. Again, we see that Sinai is never over. Our obligations continue to evolve. Through the mitzvot, we learn to frame and balance our complex obligations. When we ask ourselves, what am I obligated to do in my life? To whom am I obligated? To my neighbor, to my family, to my community, to Jews, to Gentiles, to people in America, to people in Africa? Who am I obligated to? We get complex and sometimes contradictory answers, as we are obligated potentially to family, friends, neighbors, God, the vulnerable, our communities, society at large, the earth. So then in what order? What's my order? Am I most obligated to my child or to my friend? To somebody living in my town who's sick, or to someone living in a village on the other side of the world who might die? What's the order, and to what degrees am I obligated to them? Such a lack of moral clarity is not to be sustainable. Rather, we need a system of obligations that we can live off of. And that's exactly what the mitzvot are attempting to offer us. A system of obligation by which to frame our own decision making. When we have limited time and limited resources and limited energy, how will I fulfill my obligations today? The Talmud, the text by which we learn so much about the mitzvot and their application, is primarily occupied with weighing obligations against one another. For example, if you're invited to a wedding and a funeral at the same time, which one should you go to the wedding or the funeral? Well, answers vary. Our sages say that a funeral procession must yield before a bride. So presumably one goes to the wedding, right? The wedding must be more important than the funeral if the funeral should basically stop its walking for the wedding, for the bride. However, the Rambam, Maimonides, offers a different opinion, opting for the funeral on the grounds of the line from Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, better to be at a house of mourning than a house of feasting. I love that line, by the way. Better to be at a house of mourning than a house of feasting. Of course, we should be joyous. We should celebrate. But if picked to choose, it's better to sit with those in lowly places than it is in times of celebration. Or consider a more drastic example. We know it is a Torah obligation to save a life. However, how much are we expected to sacrifice to save a life? $5? $5 million? Should I be willing to give up my leg or my arm to save a life? Should I be willing to give up my own life to save a life? There's so many factors at play. The body's at risk, financial means, security at large. In both of these examples, we find that when we try to apply our obligations to real-world situations, many of them contradict. My life takes precedence to your life, but how much of my life should I be willing to give up? Evidently, just because we have a system of obligations does not mean we'll ever have perfect certainty in our decisions. Rather than clear answers, our mitzvot give us a framework to talk about a moral universe that is increasingly complex. When we talk about AI and new medical technologies, and many people have simply no moral compass to wrestle with the new realities that are emerging. They just think what feels scary and what doesn't feel scary, and what feels familiar and unfamiliar, and how do we develop a notion of duties amidst a rapidly changing society. We now come to the third reason. Okay, friends, mitzvot, number one, we said action. Number two, we said, what did we say? Obligation, the value of obligation. Number three, relationship. And then here we'll conclude and open the conversation. The third reason we should consider the mitzvot as one of the great Jewish ideas is this. The mitzvot are an invitation to relationship. Returning to the Aramaic cognate tzavta, or connectedness, we can see how the concept of relationship is embedded in the very word mitzvah. Truly, what an obligation does is actually strengthen a relationship. One of the most apparent examples of this is the ketubah, or the marriage contract, which articulates a series of obligations. Right? You might have thought at the wedding that we're going to read poetry. We're going to read some beautiful poetic expression of love. If we actually translated the ketubah, it would actually sound very dry and cold. It's a legal contract of taking care of each other. A system of obligation is essentially for the nurturing of our most intimate relationships. If I've committed X, Y, and Z to you as my life partner, and you've committed X, Y, and Z to me, that makes us feel safe with each other. It is certainly not a given that a religion would offer a framework for making moral decisions. It's easy to imagine an approach that tells the devoted to simply pray to God and love people of abstract ideas, giving no clear commandments. In some ways, it perhaps sounds liberating to reject the notion of obligation and leave so much up to every individual to follow their own path. But in other ways, we can see how the lack of obligations might limit the depth of our relationships to one another and to the divine. We are blessed to ask something of each other, to expect things of each other, right? Imagine a workplace that had no norms, imagine a society that had no laws. Like, you could drive as fast as you want, you could hurt people however you wanted, you could steal what you wanted. Right? It's hard to even imagine a lawless society. In fact, the Menachem Meiri, the Meiri of medieval thinker, said we should define an idolater and a non-idolater not based on what they believe in God or not, but based upon whether they embrace law or lawlessness. He changed the notion of idolatry from a theological category to a moral category. He said, normally you'd say, oh, the one who prays to a rock, idolater. The one who believes in one God, believer. He said, it's a little more complicated. The one who believes in law and order, right? I know it's kind of a loaded political phrase these days, but the one who believes in law, let's say, cannot be called an idolater. And one who is lawless, doesn't believe in any moral order, they should be called and treated as an idolater. Part of this relatedness is how the mitzvot allow us to relate to ourselves, as there's an element of self-expression in how we choose to apply the moral framework they give us. Imagine you told someone to go on stage and sing a song, giving them no lyrics at all. The person, perhaps the child, might spend a lot of their energy thinking of the lyrics, hesitating and scrambling on the spot to think of words, unable to focus on the quality of the singing. However, if you give someone the lyrics to a song before you sent them on stage, they would be able to put so much more energy into how well they sing the words, rather than just thinking of the words. The mitzvot we've inherited are like words to a song. Rather than starting from scratch of moral questions, we are able to build out from the framework we've been given, and in that way attune ourselves more fully to our own expression of this framework. We can think about the beauty of the song rather than the words of the song. The mitzvot are truly a great Jewish idea. They offer us action, obligation, and connectedness. I return to the Sfat Emet, who likened doing a mitzvah to lighting a candle before God. The more light a person brings about in the physical darkness through doing the mitzvot, the more one will enlighten one's soul from the light above. The radical beauty of the mitzvot is not that they give us rules. Rules is no insight. Rather, it is that we as Jews have developed a dialectical argumentative process that puts the various mitzvot into tension with each other, in dialogue with each other. There's no simple answers. There are no clean-cut rules. There are no universal courses of action. There is relativity and a subjectivity. We act, there's commandments, we are in relationship, but we are not instructed on what exactly to do, but rather presented with an orientation which requires deep intellectual, spiritual, and relational engagement to navigate. Friends, to move towards a conclusion, the word for Jewish law by which the mitzvot are enacted, halakha, comes from a root word to go or to walk. Halakha is often translated as the way. It could also be translated as progress. To walk forward is a spiritual journey. To whatever degree we choose to accept mitzvot in our lives and larger halachic path, this is a path that is most concerned not with what is in our hearts, although we will see later in our next class the importance of this idea of what's in our hearts, but concerned with actions. A skeptic is stuck with no way to move forward. But as Jews, we have to keep acting even though the full truth has not been revealed to us, even when a situation is so complex that the right path is not clear. We need to walk slower, but we must keep moving. Okay, dear friends, now I turn to you, and I would love to hear from you.
Good morning, everyone. Maybe this is not a real heavy question, but so how do we determine, well, if our mitzvot are obligations, how do we determine what obligations I'm going to accept and what obligations that I'm not? And in light that we live in a world of liberalism, Jewish liberalism and Jewish orthodoxy, there's one side says you can kind of pick and choose or leave it up to you, and the other one side, the other group says, these are the things you have to do. That to me becomes very question those things in myself.
Great question. So, to start with, and Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, teaches, and I'll use the Christian word here, which I don't like. We are all sinners. And again, I really don't like the Christian word, but what is meant over there is nobody can always do the right thing. We all make mistakes. We all do wrong things, and that should give us the humility to know that on the level of do no harm, we all do some harm. I mean, intentionally, unintentionally, and so too on the good, no one can do all the good. Right? And no one can do all the mitzvot. Someone might say, I'm observant. I do all the mitzvot. No, you don't. Right? At every moment, there's multiple mitzvot we can do, and you have to choose one. You can't go to the funeral and the wedding at the same time, right? You can't be learning Torah and visiting the sick, right? You can't be lighting your panakia and also, be teaching a child, right? So we're always making choices. We can never do everything. And if we start with that humility, that there's not the observant and the unobservant, right? But rather, everyone is trying to do good. Let's move it from observant, like the religious and the non-religious. Everyone is trying to do good. And there's many ways to do that. And all of us should build on doing more good. And so where do we look to determine which good to do? So if I'm in the ultra-Orthodox world, the way that I know what to do is I ask my rabbi. That's the only way I know what to do good. There's not necessarily a promotion of developing one's own moral intuition as much as you have a question, you go get an answer. Now, I'm not putting down that approach. That is a legitimate Jewish approach that is rabbi-centered. The way I know what's right and wrong is I go to the greatest scholar that I'm in relationship with of Jewish values, and they guide me. That's one approach. The liberal approach is the opposite. It's kind of a rejection of authority as a guide, and that one has to kind of navigate themselves with them and their spouse, or them and their therapist, or them and their coach, or one's own reflections. And then there's a whole middle ground which I imagine most of us are in. Where do I go to a lawyer? Where do I go to a doctor? Where do I go to my wise friend? When do I go to a rabbi? When do I turn to a book? Right? Right? Who is the right person for this question? And when do I have to make the decision on my own? So, when do I look at the Shulchan Aruch, like a code of law or a book? And when do I look at New York Times, ethicist and what that person thinks, or the like. And so these are really complicated. It's worth asking ourselves the question, where do I find moral authority? Some of us might say it's the Shulchan Aruch, or it's the Talmud, or it's the Torah, or it's my rabbi. Someone might say, the only authority is in my own reason, right? That's kind of where Kant was pushing us, that in an era of modernity, the only authority is human reason, right? As opposed, he does want to jive it with revelation. It's complicated. But in any case, Gary's question is so great because, okay, we're all committed to mitzvot. Someone might say, I think they're commanded to God through Moses, and I'm going to do exactly what X, Y, and Z says. And someone else might take a liberal approach and say, as a Jew, I relate to Passover Seder, and I relate to Hanukkah, and I relate to helping people because that's my culture, even if I don't know or believe that this was kind of revealed at Sinai, so to speak, right? Whatever it is, as Jews, we do mitzvot, and how to navigate that, it's very complicated. So, Gary, I'm so glad you raised that. Thank you. Who else wants to hop in on this? David, I see you. I think you're unmuting, David.
I'll hop in. Yeah. Well, one thing that I love about mitzvot is there's so many opportunities to do good. The talis, there's so many fringes, so many tzitzit, and so no matter where you are, if you're working, if you're retired, if you're in a retirement home, if you're in your bed, there are opportunities to give kindness, receive kindness, give a smile. You don't have to be bored or dejected. There are always, you open your door, open your window, and there are opportunities to do good in the world.
Yes. David, thank you so much for saying that. I love that because we can all say, like, look, as a human being, I want to be decent. And that's great. As a human being, I want to be decent. But then in every situation, we say, if I want to be more than decent, how can Jewish wisdom inspire me to do a little more, right? How can it inspire me to not only be a decent human, but also be inspired by Jewish wisdom to go even further? And you're right. The question emerges, how do I be ethical in my business practice? How do I elevate my home? How do I help people? And when I'm, at different stages of my life, okay, I don't have kids at home anymore, or I can't walk anymore, or now I'm in a hospital bed, as you're saying, like now in my new reality, how can I do mitzvot here? And the truth is, I have seen people in hospital beds who raise up everybody who comes to them. I don't think that a decent human is obligated to do that. A decent human is just obligated to get some rest in bed and take care of themselves, right? They don't have to lift up anybody, but just heal. But I have seen so many people that I've visited in hospitals, and my mother is my prime example, who lift up every nurse who walks in the room, every doctor who comes in. My mother would say, "How are you?" And smile to them and have them feel good about who they were. Not just who she was. She wasn't like, oh, I feel obligated to this and that, But the truth is, in every situation, there is a chance to do that. And so anyways, David, thank you for that inspiring idea. Yes, hi, Aglaia.
Hi. Okay, so I just have to toss the door closed because it's loud. But so I'm usually in the crowd of, basically think before you act, always think before you act and everything, though. However, though, there is another side to it. I know that, starting from this point, no two people are ever going to believe the same thing, have the exact same beliefs. And then two, the other thing, though, is that it's really 100% unrealistic to believe that anyone will believe the exact same thing their entire lives. So where I'm coming from, though, is that mitzvot actually help us when we're having these times of, okay, I don't believe this, I don't believe that. Wait a minute, do I believe this? Do I believe that? I don't know. It's actually helping you, sort those problems out. Also, these, whatever you want to call them, these, times of doubt or questioning or whatever and everything like that though. So I wanted to like see, does anyone else want to like actually like have the same experience, like thinking about it from, okay, I'm having this like these questions and everything, and I'm not sure like exactly what I believe, but if I'm still, I'm still keeping Shabbat or whatever, then somehow this is going to, all of these questions inside of me are going to work themselves out.
Great. Yeah, I love that. And I hope people will pick up on Aglaya's invitation to reflect on that with us. But just to share one thought on that, I think that the mitzvah gives an anchor when our thoughts and beliefs are constantly in flux. As Aglaya is saying, right? We don't need to be so ideological. I absolutely believe in God. I absolutely reject God. Or I absolutely believe X or X. Let's live in a world of mystery, right? Where I'm not so positive. I'm not so sure of everything, right? And as my ideas change about the world and about reality, right, that I have some anchors in my life. And so too, like a good example too would be like our relationship to a child changes a lot, right? And what we think about them, how we feel around them, or to our parents, how we feel around them. But there's some basic decency that's always going to be built into the mitzvah of how we relate to them, even if our relationship constantly evolves. So too, what we believe about Shabbat will constantly evolve. But is there a practice of Shabbat we maintain, even as our thoughts change around it, and our beliefs change around it? So Aglaya, I love that invitation on how the actions can be a form of consistency while our beliefs are shifting. Anyone want to build off that or go another direction?
I'm trying to stay quiet as the Reform rabbi here. So
no, please, we want to hear from the Reform rabbi.
So like one of the 100 thoughts rattling around in my mind. I love that Franz Rosenzweig quote. Do you perform all of the mitzvot, all 613 commandments? And to which he replied, not yet. I love, right? So we have this idea that, and then as Reform Jews, we're guided kind of in our best moments by this idea that we're, my brain just stopped. The past has a vote, but not a veto. That kind of Kaplan-esque idea, right? That we're guided by tradition, but not commanded by tradition. So we have a weird relationship with commandedness anyway. And then we're led by the philosophy of Herman Cohen, who says our engagement in ritual activity that we choose to do voluntarily has a higher level of meaning, so the theory goes, than doing it because of ritual expectation. Right? So me choosing to light Shabbat candles or to keep kosher or to put on tefillin has a different level of engagement than just doing it because it's ritually expected. But then, of course, you've created an entire community of people who opt not to, and so we lift up the energy of personal autonomy, sometimes over the expectation of mitzvot. So that's where it becomes problematic in the Reform movement. But I think the idea that we're grounded in this talk, in this constant pullback into covenantal expectation is sort of that's the energy, at least in Jewish engagement, even as a Reformed rabbi. So I don't know if I just said a lot or a little, but I'm just throwing a few ideas out there.
Great. I am so I'm so glad you did, and that brings us to an opportunity to think together about Eugene Borowitz. So, as folks may not know, Eugene Borowitz, and Rabbi Katz will know more. Maybe I bet you even studied with him. Rabbi Dr. Eugene Borowitz was the greatest Reform theologian of the late 20th century. Would you say that's a fair statement? Okay. And he has a whole work on how Reformed Jews can think about and revive the notion of obligation and mitzvot. And I want to share a quote from him, if I can. But Rabbi Katz, do you want to share any thought on him and your understanding or relationship to him before I do that?
I mean, I don't know if this is germane. I mean, I'm sure you're going to share a better quote of his or teaching, but I'll just share that when I was coming up, there was a kind of the debate was over by the time I got to rabbinic school, but there was this fight between Borowitz and Alvin Reines, who had a different construct. And so I spent 4 years with Alvin Reines, who believed in what's called polydoxy, which is the big tent form of Jewish identity and very limited expectation. But our movement aired is the wrong word. Our movement sided with Borowitz and ultimately said, no, as a movement, we're going to base ourselves in covenant theology, not in personal decision making.
Okay. Oh, great. So on that point, I think that here's a great quote that I think goes along with that. So Rabbi Borowitz wrote a book called Renewing the Covenant. And here's something he writes. I just put it in the chat over there. I do not see how, even in principle, Jewish law can be imposed on such a Jewish self. Rather, with autonomy essential to selfhood, I avidly espouse pluralism of thought and action stemming from Jewish commitment. So he wants to, and I'm going to invite Rabbi Katz back into the conversation in a moment, that rather than simply say like, we can all just do as we choose, and our personal autonomy is our center. We want our center to be this form of Jewish commitment. As a Reformed theologian, he's going to reject the notion that God spoke Torah word for word at Sinai. But that doesn't mean we're not obligated. There is still an obligation that emerges from our commitment. And one of the biggest assets, you might say, and biggest weaknesses of the Reform movement, in my view, but I want to hear Rabbi Katz's view on this, is not having halakha. Now, some people in the Reform movement for a long time have wanted there to be Reform law, that there should be law and committees, and there have been some things like that. And that is very liberating because the Reform movement can adapt to the needs of the American Jewish community today, right? And yet that's also difficult because there's not necessarily this ability to create change and have that type of continuity. But I say all this with a deep love and respect for the Reform movement and just in the interest of thought. But Rabbi Katz, I'd love to hear your thought on that, how you relate to this Borowitz idea of autonomy versus Jewish commitment, and how you relate to this idea of the Reform movement not having halakha, and the voices that think there should be and the voices that think there shouldn't be. And then I'll take you out of the hot seat after that.
Well, no. I'm just laughing because I just got back from the Recharge Reform Conference in New York. So I'm definitely on the re-energized reform side of things. I'm going to answer with a kind of a meta comment that ultimately it's a pendulum, and we swing towards universalism or particularism. And I am of the opinion that we have swung too far to universalism. That's me. I'm not a halakhic. I'm not. As a true Reformed Jew, I'm not. I'm part of a non-halakhic movement. I get that, but we have replaced our particularisms with universalisms. That's the forefront of our religion, and that makes us ultimately weaker. That's a personal opinion, but that's the point of that conference. And we're trying to reroot ourselves in the particulars of Judaism. So that includes ritual activity, Zionism, Hebrew, prayer.
Yes.
Fill in the blanks.
Right.
And so going back to Borowitz, I mean, this notion of Jewish commitment, that should be our first and foremost energy.
Right.
And sometimes we forget that.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're weighing in on this. And my biggest loving critique of Orthodox Judaism today is that it has gone so strong on particularism and so weak on universalism. Orthodox Jews are the best at taking care of local Jews, and yet the weakest at taking care of humanity at large, and the opposite of Reform Judaism. The Reform Judaism today is so universalistic, taking a stand on all the important causes of the day, but doesn't always have the infrastructure to be as particularistic as you shared. And I think both should continue to learn from each other. I would love to see Orthodoxy not lose its particularism and grow its universalism. I'd love to see Reform Judaism not lose its universalism, but deepen that particularism. And I'm glad you're a part of that voice in there. And I'm a part of the voice in Orthodoxy that's the opposite. So yes, Rabbi Katz, yeah.
30-second plug for Shmuly Yankowitz here. I mean, to that point, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would never have even considered, there's been a breakdown of denominational walls. Yeah. And I mean, one of the heights of that would be Hartman. But as the denominational energy sort of flows away, I mean, I look to teachers like you, and it's silly that it was ever put up in the first place. But
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Thank you. I feel I feel so blessed that somehow along my journey, I got pulled into pluralism, because pluralism is so central to my way of thinking in the world now, that I used to view other ideas as threats. There's a war between Reform and Orthodox. There's a war between liberals and conservatives. There's a war, of this, as opposed to, right. There's just so much to learn from other human beings, and we all hold to different parts of the truth, and that learning is so much more enriched in the diversity. So thank you for being with us and for sharing that. Yeah, David, over to you.
Hey. Yeah, I really appreciate having my Orthodox rabbi and Reform rabbi. This is wonderful. I missed an opportunity because we were my husband and I, in Rome last summer, and a young Chabad rabbi-to-be came by and wanted me to wrap tefillin. And I said no, because I don't know. I don't know why I said that. I didn't want him to push me or ask me for money or something. But I missed an opportunity. What a nice young man. We talked with him. He was cool with gay marriage, and he was, learning his craft. And these simple mitzvahs, what a wonderful opportunity that I missed. So next time I'm in Rome, for sure I'm going to do it.
Thank you, David. Well, I'm laughing because one of my friends here on the Zoom has an interesting relationship to the tefillin askers in the street. But I appreciate your point, and I do appreciate that. Yeah. So someone might relate to that moment as a little intrusive, like, hey, like, why am I being asked to put tefillin on the street? And someone else might view it as, hey, there's an obligation to do a mitzvah, and thank you for giving me that opportunity. Right. And, but what I love about what you're saying, David, is that when we're walking through our day, every moment is an opportunity for mitzvah. Every moment. To raise someone up rather than tear them down, to bring light rather than darkness, right? Every moment is a chance to add learning and curiosity rather than shut our minds off. Every moment is a chance to feel love, to feel awe, to feel, so many different noble emotions, and as opposed to just living by rote. So thank you for that, and the chance to view people we encounter as partners in mitzvah. Whether it's the guy offering tefillin, if we choose to engage or not, or whether it's the person in the checkout line at the grocery store, right? So thank you. All right, who have we not heard from yet who might want to jump in? Matthew or Steve or Eddie or Alex or Shulamit? Anyone else want to jump in here? Okay, Matthew, hello.
Yeah, just one earlier thought when you talked about action, and the best is to act righteously, second is to make a mistake, and the third is to do nothing.
Yeah.
I think of the Musar concept of patience and keeping the flame away from something, and the pause button, and how we can sometimes use that as an excuse to not do the right thing.
Yes.
On the other hand, sometimes doing nothing is absolutely the right thing, especially in medical terms, where
Right.
you can do experimental drugs, you could not act, but sometimes not acting is actually the best thing. And sometimes in circumstances, not saying anything is the best and right thing. And there's the classic story of William Shirer, Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, that the Germans allowed the reporters to go visit the troops who were getting ready to invade England, to write stories about this massive invasion. And he went to the American naval attaché in Berlin and said, what should I be looking for? And the answer was boats. If no matter how many troops there are, they got to cross the channel. And he went there and everyone wrote stories, and he refused to write a story. Because the real story was there were no boats. And they finally, Germans said, you have to write. And he wrote a story that the UPI that he wrote for picked up and understood what he wrote. And their story was, there are lots of troops, but no way to invade. So sometimes not doing something can be the right thing, and pausing.
Yes, Matthew, I'm so glad you said that. That was such an important corrective to what I shared earlier, because one could have left with the opposite impression. I think you're exactly right in both points. In the first point, that sometimes we say, oh, it's so complex. It's so complex, so we don't do something when we really do have to make a moral choice. And we give ourselves the out of not acting when we really do have to make a choice. We can't just say it's complex or, someone else is going to do it. And yet there are so many cases where you're exactly right that the right thing to
Alea
do.
just put a beautiful comment that it's complex and you really have to think through at times. And especially in dealing with familiar or close friends, when you act as opposed to pausing and being supportive
Right.
is really the hardest judgment call.
Right. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And I think there are so many cases that call for restraint and patience, like you said. And let's just take and I think it moves us out of a binary also. Sometimes acting can move us into a binary. Sometimes we're in an estranged relationship with a family member. And it may be that the right thing to do is to try to get closer to them. It may be that the right thing to do is to put more distance between them. Or it may be that status quo is okay. We don't love to stay in the gray zone. It may just be that.
Or
Yeah.
saying, let's put it on pause for a while and let things calm down.
Exactly.
I respect you, respect me, but let's take a break.
Exactly. I think that's very well said. So anyways, friends, the category of mitzvah is one that is offers a great revolution to the world that says, yes, there's times to pause and show restraint, but there's also times and on a daily basis, we need to roll up our sleeves and change the world. We need to roll up our sleeves and bring kindness and use our efforts for good. We are on a pause next week for Erev Shavuot. Shavuot starts next Tuesday night, but Tuesday will be a pause. And we look forward to continuing after that with session number 9. And as a reminder, after the 10 sessions, we then have 10 pieces of Torah wisdom on leadership. If you wish to continue with us, we hope you will. Have a wonderful day.